So we're going to continue in Romans chapter 9. Let me turn to that. And can anybody tell me what they remember from last week? Any takeaways from last week? I see Amy. Amy is raising her hand.
That God chose us. We didn't choose God.
Yes. And remember, though, this is super important, you guys. Chapter 9 deals with election, but it deals with election on a national, not individual basis. The context that Paul sets in Romans 9, he does now in Romans 6, 7, and 8, he talks about election as far on an individual basis, but now he's moving into God's dealing with the nations. And because he's dealing with both the Gentiles and the Jews in the Roman church, he then deals with the macro issue of Israel and the Gentile nations. And so chapter 9, and this is really important, needs to be understood in the context, not of the individual, but the context of the nations. And so I think that's important so that we don't have any misunderstandings in regards to what is being said. Okay, any other comments from last week? Anything strike you? Anything hit home or?
Yes, but it was actually the verse after where we ended off where God says, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. And it just seemed very sobering when I saw it last week.
It's really interesting that we, as believers, we say God is the judge, right? He's the judge of all. But we always try to hamstring him on his authority as judge. The judge has the right to pass sentence on whomever he deems fit to pass sentence. And he has the right to give mercy and acquit whomever he decides to acquit. Now, in human terms, this can be a product of imperfection, bad reasoning, or even corruption. But when we're talking about God, we're talking about the perfect sense of a judge. And so Romans 9 really, I think, portrays God as the perfect righteous judge and gives him the full authority, sovereignty to judge the nations. And I just find it interesting how on one hand we see that, we all talk about Judgment Day and we all talk about God as the judge, but then we build and work these theologies that try to somehow depreciate or undercut God's authority and ability to judge. And I think that's something we really need to think about, because as we go through Romans, Paul is trying to give us a pure theology. He's trying to give us a undefiled picture of who God is and who we are and how the gospel works. And so in verse 14, we talked just a little bit of review. We talked last week about, number one, Paul says, I would be condemned to hell if it meant that all of Israel would be saved as a nation. Now he's talking national. He doesn't say Jews, but Israel. So he's talking national here. And Paul begins to talk about God's undeniable blessings for Israel. And he talks about the fact that they're a special nation. And he talks about why they're a special nation, because one, they've been adopted by God. God adopted, the Amos 3:3, right? And because God revealed himself to him. God didn't reveal himself over in China or Japan or Africa or, Mexico, or God revealed himself in the Fertile Crescent, in the Anatolian Peninsula, where Abraham lived. God revealed himself to Abraham in modern day Turkey. And God called Abraham and adopted Abraham and promised him a nation. He revealed himself to Abraham and made a covenant with him. He revealed himself in the Mosaic covenant. He led Israel out of captivity in a supernatural way, revealed himself. He revealed himself in the Davidic covenant. And because of their special relationship with God, it had 4 resulting consequences. One, it had the consequence or the result of worship. They were able to worship the true God. No one else on earth was worshiping the true God. Think about that. They didn't know the true God. Also, it resulted in the fact that God promised that the Messiah would come through Israel, through the tribe of Judah, through the Davidic line. Then also it resulted in giving them a godly heritage. They were a special people. Their whole identity, the American identity is wrapped up in free market, democracy, the Constitution. But for Israel, their whole identity was wrapped up in the fact that they were children of God. Very different. Also, it resulted in the fact that they would eventually bring forth the Son of God. So Paul is all in invested in Israel and says that they've received so much. And then he begins to talk about the fact that why did Israel receive all of this? Well, because of God's sovereign election. And then he begins to talk about Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was the product of a slave woman representing the law. Isaac was the product or the seed of promise, representing grace. And then he goes from the law and grace. Now, the next example he gives is Jacob and Esau, both children of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, Ishmael wasn't, but Jacob and Esau are. But God, in his sovereignty, chooses Jacob to carry on the covenant. And everything, folks, everything about this covenant is Yeshua-centric. It's all about Christ, okay? Everything that is going on here in God's sovereign election within Israel itself is God controlling the channel of where Jesus will eventually be born. So there's a purpose, and this is important. Let me say this. There's a purpose behind God's election. And that purpose is salvation. That purpose is his glory. So you have to follow Paul's thought pattern here. And what he's doing is he is narrowing down these covenants and this movement of Israel and the calling and choosing and election. It's all about Christ. It's Christocentric. Okay? So then he moves on from Jacob and Esau. He talks about the fact that he chose Jacob when? When did he choose Jacob? Somebody tell me. Somebody who was here last week and was listening on the edge of their seats. When did he choose Jacob?
Before
Yeah.
before he was born, and also before he did any good or bad.
Thank you, Jeff. So God is making it clear that his election has nothing to do with you personally, has nothing to do with your works. God chose Jacob and rejected Esau before any of them did anything. Okay? And why is Paul bringing this up? Paul needs us to understand that our salvation will never be based on what we do or who we are. It will never be based on what we do or who we are. It's based on what Christ has done and who he is. You see that? Extremely important, because anytime that you see the gospel be contaminated or twisted or whatever, it has to do with these two things: who we are, what we do, who Christ is, what he's done. And so Paul is making a very strong argument. Now, he has to do this. Why? Why does he have to do this? Why do you think? Tell me, why do you think he has to do this? Amy.
Because by grace you are saved through Christ Jesus, not by works, lest any man should boast. So you don't brag. I don't know.
Okay, so yes, that's the essence of the gospel. But why is Paul in this letter to these specific people communicating it in this way?
Oh, and this specific?
Yeah.
Don't know.
What do you think? Let's think. Let's put on our thinking caps.
The verse says, in order that God's purpose and election might stand. So, it's not by works, but by him who calls. She was told that's what, yeah.
Okay, and that is true, but why? Why is Paul communicating this way to these people in these specific terms?
Because they think they're hot stuff, because they think they don't need God, Christ. I don't know. I'm just thinking.
Well, to go to the sheep and goat kind of analogy, they're stubborn people. They were used to having it as a work-oriented kind of salvation. They had to have the lamb's blood for sacrifice.
Aha. So hold on. Who had that? Remember now, he's
Jews.
writing to 5 churches in Rome.
The Jews had to do all this, and the Jews were expecting the Gentiles to do the same thing. And Paul was saying, no, the playing field is level.
John, you get the gold star for the week. That's exactly it. Paul is writing to Jews and Gentiles, and it's important that the Jews understand that their heritage, who they are as Jews, is a wonderful thing, but has nothing to do with their salvation. And he's using their most beloved ancestors to prove that point. All right. Remember now, what is the verse? What is the verse in all of Romans? If we were to boil all of this down into a nutshell, it's the jumping off point of all this discussion. And it's the verse, and in it, you find the reason why Paul is saying everything that he's saying.
Can I take a guess at this?
Sure.
Romans 3.
Nope.
Okay, never mind. I was going to read it, but never mind.
It's a good try. Come on now. I've
Is
mentioned
it
this.
verse 8?
What's that?
Is it verse 8?
No.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's in chapter 1.
Yeah, Romans 1:16.
Yes. John, you're on a roll. That's your second gold star.
Well, you told us that in the first week that the key verse was this.
Yes, I did. I've repeated it about 5 or 6 times since then. John, why don't you read that verse for us?
Okay. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jews, then for the Gentiles. For in the gospel, of righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith.
There it is, folks, right there. This is the message. If you were to take all of Romans and say, what is Paul trying to say to these Jews and Gentiles? That's what he's saying. And he spends the rest of Romans saying it in about 12 different ways. And it's really important that we understand why. See, in order, and I'm hoping you guys, I'm hoping that part of this, and that's why I'm going to start asking more questions like this from you guys, because I really want to avoid you, we can sit back and listen to teaching, right? It's easy to do. But I want to know that you're absorbing and thinking about what we're saying, and challenge you to dig for these thoughts and dig for these answers, because when you come up with them, when John comes up and says these things, now he owns them. That's a huge part of teaching. It's not just the dispensing of information. Teaching has 3 important steps. 1, dispensing of truth. 2, the embracing of truth. And 3, the living of truth. So anyone who is in a role of a pastor is going to want to teach the truth, make sure that you are understanding and embracing the truth, and holding you accountable to live out the truth. And so, I'm not your pastor. I get that. And I'm not in your lives physically to see whether or not you're living out the truth. But I can ask you to hear the truth by speaking it, and then ask you to embrace the truth by asking you these questions to see if you're listening, if you're hearing what is being said, and owning these thoughts for your own. Because this is really super important. My heart's desire for you is that all of you are not only hearing what I'm saying in God's word, but that you're thinking about it and then owning the truth that you hear and think about. And that you own it enough that where it actually begins to shape your life. So that's really important. So going down now into verse 14, it says, "What shall we say then? There is no injustice with God, is there? May it never be. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but the God who has mercy." Now, let me ask you guys something. Look at me. Look at my eyes right now. Let me ask you something. I'm going to read this verse again. It says, it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on the God who has mercy. I have been talking about election. I have been talking about God granting you faith and repentance. Now tell me, does my teaching on this line up with that verse? Yes. It does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on the God who has mercy. This is very important for us to understand because this is dealing with the sovereignty of God. And here's the thing. Some people say, well, okay, look, so a lot of people believe that they choose God, God doesn't choose them. What's the big deal? I'll tell you what the big deal is. When you realize that you are hopeless and you are helpless to save yourself, that the very decision to cry out to Christ and the very repentance to turn from your sin is given to you by God, not by yourself. This will change your outlook on your own pride, your own self-sufficiency, and your destiny. It will change your outlook on your pride because you will realize that God does not need you at all. You need him. On your self-sufficiency because you are dead in your trespasses and sin, and yet he woke you up from the grave. And just as you had no choice in the conception and birth of your physical being, you have no choice in the conception and birth of your spiritual being, that your life now will not be based on some I better live up to this, or I'm not going to go to heaven. And you will realize that you are destined for heaven. And so you better live and enjoy the life of a child of God. It's not about earning your way there. It's not about the stiff upper lip. It is about enjoying God, enjoying freedom, enjoying every aspect of growth, of holiness that there is. This makes for two very different types of Christians. When you realize that your destiny has been sealed, not by, like he says about Jacob and Esau, your works or your choices, what you have done, but by what God has done and who Christ is. And a lot of Christians are not enjoying their life as believers. You know, why does James say, "Count it pure joy, my friends, when you suffer trials of many kinds"? Why does he say that? Because he realizes and he knows that once you know your destiny, that you are destined, and nothing can change this. Nothing. For I am convinced that neither height, nor depth, nor width, nor principalities above or below, nor angels, nor demons, nor anything will be able to separate me from the love of God. How can you not walk in this life with a good attitude, a looking forward to what your future will be? Some people bemoan the fact that they don't have as much money as they should have, or they're not doing as well as their peers are doing, or they're not who they think they should be at this point in life. Useless. Useless. You're going to die. You might be 50 or 55 or 45. You don't know if you're going to live tomorrow. I thought I'd see this baby goat be an adult, but he may not have tomorrow. You may not have tomorrow. So why are you so worried about how much money you have, or how well you're doing, or how good you look to other people that are going to stand in front of a judge who is God, just like you are? Why are you worried about that? Shouldn't you be concerned with your eternal soul? And shouldn't you be running after a joy that is not based on how much money you make, or what career you have, or who you know, or what people think of you, but a joy that is based on the fact, not theory, fact, that you are going to live with God forever in joy and in peace and in glory? Something to ask yourself. Something for all of us to ask ourselves, because even as Christians, we can get sidetracked and distracted on really stupid stuff.
I have a comment or a question.
Sure.
Yeah, that's totally agree with all that. That's awesome. One thing I wonder is, you know, I guess I'll use the word balance, and maybe that's way out of line here, but I remember back in the day, a pastor at a church I used to go to, one time he made a comment. He said, "You know what? Live as if Jesus is coming tomorrow, but plan as if he's coming in 100 years. Right. So the idea about worry about money, things like that. Yeah, of course, we're not supposed to worry, but yeah. So I think it's just balance. We still need to plan about stuff, and I don't think you're saying not to plan and be ready for the future, but it's a matter of, what's. I'm not sure. Yeah, I just want to mention that.
Well, and I agree, Jeff. I see what you're saying, and I agree. And that is this, and that is the fact that we should live in the wisdom of God. Okay, and what I'm talking about, there's a difference between worry and wisdom. And for me, I'm doing a job right now. And I wasn't planning on sharing this with you guys, but I'll share it with you. I went to a house of a family, and originally she just wanted me to remove this decorative tile in her shower and replace it with another tile. But I noticed that she had severe mold in the shower. And so we began to talk about, and what had happened was the house is 110 years old.
Wow.
The original house, the original tile was still there. Her husband tiled over the old tile in 1983. And it was an awful job. But, he's trying to save money and whatever. So I came in and she says, well, what if you just removed all of the tile my husband put on and kept the original tile, because we're trying not to have to redo the waterproofing and rip out the pan and all that stuff. So I said, look, we can try that, but I don't know what I'm going to get once I rip out that wall. Now here's the thing. And I gave her a bid for what it would cost to do that. They're strong believers, both of them. Sincere. Their theology is very, very good. In fact, she's been listening to our Roman studies. She really likes them. Her husband, Don, her name's Robin. Her husband, Don, is 60 years old, not quite 60 years old. And he has severe early onset Alzheimer's. And as I've worked with this family, basically what ended up happening was when I chiseled the tile out, I found that there was water damage. And I ended up having to remove all of the walls and the ceiling and redoing everything, including the plumbing. It was really interesting because the ceiling in the shower, when I ripped out the ceiling, there was a trap door leading to the roof. But what has ended up happening is I've been doing a lot of this work now for free. And it's because as I've gotten to know the family, he had a wonderful worship ministry in his church, Don. And it's so sad because she brought him up to see the shower. We're almost done with the shower and it's a complete transformation. I had to there was no studs in the wall. I had to reframe the wall. I had to rebuild the ceiling. I had to put all new waterproof. I mean, this is my third week on this job. And I talked to my wife about it. I said, I want to do this job for just about nothing. And she said, why? I said, because these people are believers. And I'm watching her husband. He came up to see the shower yesterday. And the bathroom's really small. And you know what, guys? He couldn't find the shower. He couldn't find it. So there's a part of me that says, I'm working 3 weeks. I need to make money. I need to have bills I have to pay. But there's another part of me that says, these are my brothers and my sisters. This woman is in deep trial in her life. And I wish I could heal her husband of Alzheimer's. I can't. But what I can do is give him a new shower and tell him it's because God loves him. And I'm not worried about my bills. Can't worry about it. Because there's things more important than your money. There's things more important. And you know what, you guys? God has always taken care of me. He's always taken care of me. I'll tell you what happened. This is very interesting, and I'm hoping this will encourage you. Like I said, I've been working on this job for no pay. It's turning out beautiful. I mean, I'm doing deco marble strips, and I'm really making it fancy for him. But this is really interesting. I had some people who had me come out to do a bid on a big job. There was 4 bathrooms. And so I did the bid, and I really gave them a good price. But really, they weren't after my bid. They didn't want me to do the work. They wanted to get my bid and then take it to the tile store and use my name to get their tile at my contractor discount price and not give me the job. They just wanted to use my name to save money. So they called me out there. I wasted half a day out there doing all these measurements, helping them out with their design, to find out they had no intention of using me whatsoever. But guess what happened? The tile store they went to sold them over $10,000 in tile. What they did not know is because they used my name, the tile store does not give them a contractor price. Today, I opened up a letter from the tile store with a check for $1,500 in it. They sent me the commission. God has a real funny way of taking care of us, you guys, even when people try to rip you off.
Praise the Lord, Tony. You always have such great stories, and it's so true. God takes care of us as long as we're faithful, right?
Yeah.
And whether we see the end or we don't, God has a better way of doing things. And that's the exciting part, is living by faith and just taking one step at a time and knowing that God will provide in, whatever he thinks you deserve, right? He's not always a yes. He's not a genie in a bottle.
Yeah.
But as long as we are faithful, I've seen him provide, and I've seen him provide for you guys, which is really, encouraging.
Yeah, God's not obligated to give us anything, but he loves his children and he's merciful.
It's interesting you should bring this thing up about, this money thing, because I had a situation where I was really worried about a certain amount of money that somebody owed me. And I was, it was bothering me. It was just like weighing on my mind, and then, and it's not, there's no outcome to it yet. But then all of a sudden I was praying about it, and God was saying, Amy, it's not their money and it's not your money. It's my money. God is saying it's my money, so don't worry. It's like, I will take care of it one way or another. And if you don't get paid back, it's, it's not to be, and I'll work something else out. So, yeah, but the funny thing about it is when I thought of it from that perspective, that it's not my money, it's not this other person's money, it's God's money, right? Then
Yeah.
I just totally relaxed and didn't worry about it anymore.
And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that we can go through life. We don't have to be stressed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, situations come up in our lives, and it's very sad to think that we would ever find our security or our identity in how much money we have, or how many houses we have or don't have, or what our status is in the eyes of other people. Because all of us, great and small, I can remember my aunt died. She died very poor in a trailer park, and I went to her funeral home. And in the funeral home, in another room, was Silvano Garaventa, who was a man who owned Garaventa Enterprises in Concord, California. He owned all of the waste management and a lot of other stuff, big, subdivisions he built. And
I think he donated a whole building at St. Mary's College because there's a building after that name.
he did. He did. And in fact, he was extremely wealthy. My brother-in-law and I worked on his house. When I started on his house, I was a helper. By the time I finished his house, I had my own business. That's how long we worked on his house over in Concord. It's up by where Gary Pollard used to live, Marlis, and where the Bartons live. And it was really interesting that I saw, here is this rich guy in a casket 30 feet away from my aunt in a casket. We all end up in the same place. And we all have an eternity either in heaven or in hell. So what's more important? How well you do on this earth, or whether or not you know Jesus Christ? And that, I think, for all of us is, I know a lot of people that grovel in their self-pity about not having enough money. Get over it. There are people, most people in the world don't have what you have. The great majority lives in poverty, and you're complaining, about not having a house or not making enough money. I mean, holy cow. If you have clothes on your back, a roof over your head, and food to eat, you are blessed. But more importantly, when you die, where will your soul be? And if your whole life is about how much money you can make, I can probably tell you where your soul's going to be. And I'm not saying that on my own opinion. Jesus said himself, no man can serve two masters, for he will love the one and hate the other, or he will cling to one and reject the other. No man can serve God and money. So we need to do a reality check on where our priorities are. Did I ever get to verse 14? Well, that was a long review. But you know what, you guys, some of this stuff, you have to understand that as I'm reading through the week, I'm thinking and I'm praying about this stuff. And so I know that a lot of times we don't move as quickly through these chapters as maybe some people think we should. But you have to realize too, and I want you to understand that I don't approach this carelessly. I'm praying, I'm reading, I'm thinking, and I do trust that the Holy Spirit will intervene on sometimes I don't get as far as I was hoping to finish up chapter 9 today. And we ended up not even getting to the beginning of chapter 14. But I think that this is important stuff. And I apologize, but I don't apologize. I think this is all, I love you guys. I don't want to just go through the Bible like a textbook. You have lives. You have trials in your lives. You have families and loved ones. And I think that and believe that God is speaking through these studies to each of you on a very personal and individual basis. And so weeks like this, where it seems that we've been here for an hour and I really never got to verse 14, I realize that God has a different agenda sometimes. And I ask you to bear with me on that, and trust that the prayer and the study that goes into this, sometimes we don't even move a verse, but for whatever reason, the Holy Spirit has decided to, I think, really speak on these things today. There's someone or all of us here that need to hear exactly what we've talked about today. And I think that that's important. This example that he has of Pharaoh is very interesting because it's done in the background of Moses. So Paul goes from Ishmael and Isaac, or Gentile Jew, to Jew, Jacob and Esau. Now he goes back to Jew, Gentile with Pharaoh and Moses, because you can't think about Pharaoh without considering Moses. And the interesting thing about Pharaoh is, when it says, what shall we say then? Is there no justice with God? May it never be. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh. See, notice now how he leverages Moses against Pharaoh. So what is he doing? He leverages Ishmael against Isaac, belief or law against grace. He leverages Jacob against Esau, belief and faith. He leverages Moses against Pharaoh, redemption versus judgment. It's very purposeful in what he is doing here. Law, grace, faith, unbelief, judgment, redemption. And he's saying in all of these instances, law or faith, belief or unbelief, grace or judgment or redemption, God is the one who is sovereignly in control of all of these situations. And he goes on to talk about Pharaoh through verse 24. And let me just read through verse 24, when he says, you will, this is verse 19, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who resists his will? On the contrary, who are you, O man, who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me like this, will it? Or does the potter have the right over the clay to make of the same lump one vessel for honorable and the other for common use? What if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and make his power known, endured with much patience the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, and he did so to make known the riches of his glory upon the vessels of mercy, who he prepared beforehand for glory, even us, whom he called, not from among the Jews only, but also from among the Gentiles. So what is he saying there? He's saying, look, and here again, you have to keep this in the context of nations. He says, one, in verse 14 through 24, and 15 through 18, he says this: God determined to pardon sinful Israel with undeserved grace, and God determined to punish sinful Pharaoh with deserved judgment. So Israel gets pardoned with undeserved grace, while Pharaoh gets judged with deserved punishment. What does that mean? It means this: all of you deserve to go to hell, each and every one of you. But yet God has chosen to redeem you with undeserved grace, while others he judges with deserved judgment. So how can God be unfair? If you want to call God unfair, he's not unfair in judging those who deserve to be judged. He's unfair by giving you heaven. So let's rethink that accusation, shall we? God's not unfair, is he? He's merciful. That's what God is. He's merciful. Well, how can God send so many people to hell? No, that's not the question. The question is, how can God bring so many people to heaven who don't deserve it? You know, Jeff, you were talking today about let Christians not talk about what they're against or what they're for. This is a primary example. It's not about people going to hell. It's about people going to heaven. If God was fair, everyone would go to hell. This is very important because we always are back on our heels when people try to hit us with these, oh, if God's so loving, why does he send people to hell? Because God's not only loving, he's also just and righteous and holy and perfect. So the question isn't, if God is so loving, why does he send people to hell? It is, if God is so holy, righteous, and just, why does he save so many people? And the only answer is because of the blood of Jesus Christ. That's why. So we have to stop apologizing for God being the sovereign, divine judge that he is. And it goes on to say, later on, it goes on to say, you know, God is like a potter, and he can make a nation for his glory, or he can make a nation for their destruction. And in one, God made Israel, Moses, for his glory. He made Pharaoh for his destruction. He has the right to do that. Now, here's something interesting that I want us to understand about this particular verse. It says, does not the potter have the right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use? What if God demonstrated his wrath to make his power known, endured with patience, much patience, vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? Now get this. This is very interesting, because then he says, but what if God, to make his mercies known, saved those vessels who were prepared for righteousness? This is very interesting. Number one, when it says those who are prepared for destruction, it's not passive voice, it's active voice. Now, for those who know language, this is what it means. The active voice means, if I were to say this, those nations who prepared themselves for destruction. That's the active voice. In other words, God didn't make them objects of wrath. They, in their sin and rebellion, made themselves objects of wrath. That's the active voice. But in the next verse, where it says, God with mercy prepared those for vessels for glory, for his glory, right? That's passive voice. There's two different voices being used in these two different verses. One, it says, those who are prepared for wrath are preparing themselves. They're doing it to themselves for wrath. The ones that are prepared for glory, guess what? It's passive voice. It means something's being done to them. That's God. God is preparing them actively for salvation. This, again, falls in line with my logic of what I see the Bible talking about election. God hardened Pharaoh's heart by letting Pharaoh continue in his sin. That's how God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God softens your heart when he goes against your sinful will and he grants you faith and grants you repentance. Active, harden Pharaoh's heart. Passive, softens your heart. Very important that we look at the language that's being used here. Okay? How does God harden your heart? Simply not giving grace. And he's not obligated to. He is the judge. He's not obligated to grant you his grace and grant you repentance and grant you faith. And you will say, well, but I want faith. I want repentance. Well, then if you want faith and you want repentance, then God must be working on your heart. If you say, well, I don't need God, I don't need his faith, I can do it myself, then guess what? God is allowing you to harden your own heart. When we understand election, when we understand how God works, it makes sense. God is not unfair, but God is judge, and he's not obligated to save anyone. And we better get that through our heads, because somehow we think, oh, it's just not fair. God should save everyone. Well, that theology, that'll land you, the only place that will land you is on a couch next to Oprah. and bound for hell. Because these people like Rob Bell and Josh Harris, these people who have turned their backs on the gospel to try to please everyone around them and make money by being popular with the unbelievers, not going to work. Not going to work. I see now that Pat has his hat on, which is a cue to me to shut up. So I'm going to stop there. And we got to, hold on. We got to verse 24.
Thank you. I'm making a note of that.
But we can view it.
And by the way, I'm going to start asking you guys more questions because I want you to start owning some of this information for yourself.
Hey, can I comment really quick?
You can review it next week.
Review.
Yeah. You can
Is this
review
going to
all.
affect our GPA?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I want to get into a good college. Hey, can I comment really quick? I've been thinking about this a lot lately, particularly after you had mentioned how love can be, if you think about it in terms of loyalty, that kind of gives us a clearer understanding of it. I've been a Christian for a long time, a lot of years. And throughout most of those years, I have always struggled with not fully understanding how God can love me or how I can be assured of God's, we'll just say, loyalty to me. But as soon as I started understanding more about election, I think that's when it started to make more sense. Because when I could see how my contribution to this relationship, if I can just remove that part out of it, I can see how much more God is more dedicated to me than my thinking that I have to do something to earn it. And then on top of that, and I can't explain this at all, but because I'm understanding election more, it actually gives me a stronger urgency for Matthew 28, the Great Commission, how I need to be more involved in sharing my faith. And I've tried to explain that to people before, but I can never do a good job of that. But yes, the election thing does make a lot of sense when you really apply your mind to it. And what's more, I don't even get it the first time around. I mean, I have to be thinking about it over a long period of time because different scenarios come up in my mind or different questions I've had forever that I haven't thought about in a while keep coming back. And then when I start considering election again, it just clicks. It makes more sense. I'm more convinced now of God's love for me than I've ever been.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how that works? Now it's been probably has it been over 2 years, Pat, when we reconnected?
Yeah, we reconnected about 3 years ago now, I think.
Has it been 3? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, I've never had a problem with election. I've never had a problem with it. I've just never really fully understood it till about, I'm going to say 3 years ago now. That's when it started to connect.
Yeah. It does that. And truth should do that. When we understand that our salvation, and we say it, it's funny, even the Arminians will say this. It's all on Christ. Christ did everything. Yeah, but do you really believe that? And they don't.
Or it's like they do, but they don't really understand what they believe. So effectively they don't.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean they're not believers. It just means that they don't fully understand the freedom that they have in Christ or what Christ has done. And I do think that it's really interesting. Back when I was in my 20s, my early 20s, when I became more Calvinistic, and it was, on the ship on YWAM, when I really started leaning in that direction, there was a guy that I knew who was, he was in his 40s, and he went to Tabernacle Baptist Church, which is the church I went to. And he completely disagreed with me on the whole election thing because, he had, been a Baptist for so long and whatever. And it's really funny because last year when I went to breakfast with my son at Digger's Diner over in Concord, I ran into him, Ralph. His name's Ralph Saul. Nice guy. And, he's like probably 70 now, but he came up to me all excited and he had discovered the doctrine of election. And he's repeating to me all these things that I was telling him when I was in my 20s that he didn't like. But he was so excited. He says, it all makes so much sense now. And it really does. You know, I really believe that sooner or later, if you are reading the Bible, sooner or later, you're going to begin to understand this.
It's going to hit.
No one ever taught me you usually either grow up in a church that teaches election or you don't. I grew up in a church that was very Arminian. Yet I became very sovereign grace, Calvinistic, however you want to put that, or the doctrines of grace, all by myself in a library on the Anastasis, because I was reading the Bible. It was there. And I can remember when I was hired on the NorthCreek Church, when I was talking with Pastor John McNeff during the interview process, he said, so who taught you all this? I said, I learned it. It's in the Bible. And I explained to him where I saw it. And he was just like, yeah. So it's there. You know, the doctrine of election and why that is so important is for us to understand the love of God in our lives and the grace of God and the power of the Spirit's work in our life. I think we need to understand the what they call solo Christos, sola gratia, sola scriptura. You know, all of these solos, Christ alone, faith alone, solo fide, the word, scriptures alone, grace alone. I mean, all of these things. To understand those doctrines that are in the Bible that our American culture has kind of steered us away from. And we have to realize that our American culture has messed with the gospel. It's made it hyper individualistic and man-centered. And we have to realize that and start reading scripture for what it says and not what we're told it says.
And
Tony, you mentioned about Rob Bell. And
Mr. Bell, yes.
What's his background? And I just looked it up. Is Mars Hill some church in Michigan, but it's not the same Mars Hill church in Seattle, right? Mark Driscoll's church?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Mark Driscoll's not a part of Mars Hill anymore either. He was fired from there. And he has a church, I think, in Arizona now. Rob Bell, my students really liked Rob Bell. This is back in 2004, 2005. He was doing these, what was it called? He was doing these videos called, I think it was called Veritas or something like that. And
they were Numa. They were Numa.
Numa. That's what it was.
Nooma.
Yeah. And I started listening to him. And I thought, this guy he was headed off, you could tell, like Tony Campola and Rob Bell and a lot of the guy that wrote The Shack and the guy that wrote Blue Like Jazz. All these people, you could tell they were headed off track. And I told my students, all these people, give them a couple years, they'll be heretics. And they all are. They all are, because their feet was never grounded in the word of God. It was all about what they thought, the machinations of their own mind, rather than reality of God's word. And they were always apologizing to the world for Christianity and trying to make friends with the world. And I'm like, good luck. You know what a church is that tries to make friends with the culture? They're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. If my church believes what the culture believes, why do I need to go to church? The
Tony,
culture is my church.
Tony, this is Elisa. Those were the precursor to the social justice movement. Menlo Park did those in a singles group with Rob Bell, and they were the precursor to the social justice movement.
Yeah, well, I would say they're the precursor to the Christian social justice movement.
Yeah, well, yeah, of
The
course.
social
but-
justice movement's been around for a while, but a lot of the, we have just lost a great amount of churches to, and I think MacArthur was right when John MacArthur said that the biggest dividing factor for the church will be the social justice movement. I think he was right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that those people who are not true believers will run hard and fast after that social justice movement. And we are, you guys, we're seeing that right now. I really do believe that the whole COVID thing is being used to destroy churches. And, to me, it's an obvious thing. Why can casinos operate at full capacity and churches can't? I'm sorry. You say what you want about COVID. I think we have seen that they have used the COVID to steal the presidency, and they've used the COVID to steal our rights. And because they banked on people operating in fear, not in the confidence of God's sovereignty. So I don't mean to be political, but at some point, you guys, our Christian life is going to intersect politics. There's no way to get around it. When they start closing churches, when they start saying that casinos can operate at full volume, but churches need to close down, then I'm going to tell you that now we're going to have a discussion.
All you have to do is say that the churches are having peaceful protests and then they'll be allowed to go to church, right?
Well, or you can do what MacArthur's done and just completely ignore them and have 7,000 people at church every week and not one COVID case. How can, like what Robert was saying, how can Taiwan, a country of 23 to 25 million people, have no restrictions, no COVID restrictions, and only have 7 deaths from COVID? How's that possible? So I think there's enough evidence out there to say that we should stop. The best way to control people is to get them to respond in fear. And you know what my 80-year-old dad said? My 80-year-old father said, they can all go to hell. I'm going to church. I'm just saying what he said. He said, and if I die, I die. But I'm going to church and I'm living my life. And if God wants to take me, he can take me. And he's been perfectly healthy now for this full year. It's just, I don't know, you guys. I think at some point we're going to, what's it going to take? How much of your freedom are you going to have to lose before you begin to say this is too much? I don't know.
Hey, Lisa, you mentioned about the social justice thing. Was that in Impact, when we were in Impact?
Yes, it was early on.
You're talking about the
Oh my
ripple
gosh,
effect, right?
that was like 2009, 2010, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere like that. Yeah.
Holy
Yeah,
cow.
I was uncomfortable at the time. I was like, what is this?
Yeah, well, that whole Numa thing, I mean, that was bad news early on. We saw that when it first came out. They played it at one of our women's ministries meeting, and our pastor said, oh no, you're not. And he nipped it in the bud.
Excuse me, Elisa, you talking about the ripple effect?
Yeah, maybe that was
Seem to have lost
No,
Elisa
I'm
there.
talking about the Numa videos. It was before the ripple effect.
Okay, it's probably before my time then.
Yeah.
Keep talking. I need to go check on the little goat.
Oh, well, that's
so.
too bad.
Yeah, I remember we were studying through this book, and then the book, they based on this verse that say, if you give water to something to one of these least, and then you're you've done it to me. But if you read closely at the verse, it's saying if you give water to one of these, the least of mine, that means only within the church, within his body. It doesn't mean the whole world. So because the church now takes that verse and kind of contorted to mean the world, to justify the social justice movement towards even people outside of the church. You remember that, Elisa?
I do remember that, but that was the Numa videos happened really early on at Impact.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like Rob Bell sitting on a bench.
Oh.
And yeah, it was different. Yeah, but I do remember that as well. I remember
maybe
that.
It was before my time then.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard of the name. I didn't know. I got some more information about this guy.
Hey, before we go out tonight, I think Christian had a question for Tony, and I just want to make sure he gets a chance to ask it.
Sure.
If you still have it, Christian.
How did you know?
I just had a sense.
Yeah. About the doctrine of election. The one thing that I don't understand is, so if this is all, if we have no part in our salvation, how does it not make our response meaningless, in a sense that we only like Stepford wives, we only puppets in a sense?
Well, you're not a puppet, because what happens is right now, Christian, the unbeliever is a puppet. The unbeliever is under the slavery of sin. The unbeliever doesn't see the truth. Their mind and their heart is darkened. So you're walking in a lie. So you're the puppet is the unbeliever. When Jesus said, I have come to set them free, and if I set them free, they shall be free indeed. When God grants you faith and repentance, he is breaking the chains. He's letting you out of jail. He's opening your eyes to see the world for what it really is. That's freedom. That's not a puppet. That's why I say that you do not have free will until you're saved. Right now, you're under the bondage and darkness of sin. You're only allowed to think and react in one way. When Christ comes in and sets you free, now you can see the reality of what is really going on. So you're not a puppet. Now, the unbeliever is a puppet, destined for hell, destined for darkness, destined for deception, to be so convinced in their own thinking that they are right, yet being completely duped.
Yeah, it seems like, that's the part I don't really understand. It seems like I understand that God has chosen us first, and we respond. You also mentioned we can respond by walking away from God. Isn't that also a form of freedom?
You could, if you walk away from God, then it shows that you've not been ever freed to begin with. Why would you walk away from glory? Why would you walk away from peace and joy and satisfaction? Why would you walk away from that? You'd only walk away from that if you're still in deception. So you're a puppet who thinks you were made a real boy, but you're still a puppet.
So how is this not like an arranged marriage somehow, and that you had no part in it, but then you are, once you're in it, you're glad that you're in it, right? But how is this not like kind of like an arranged marriage? That's the part.
It is an arranged marriage.
It is.
Sure it is. What's wrong with an arranged marriage?
We are the bride of Christ.
If your parents brought to you a beautiful, gorgeous, smart, intelligent, patient, kind, and loving wife, you'd be an idiot not to say yes. The only difference is you're the bride, Christ is the groom.
Mhm. Yeah, I have to think about that. That's the part I struggle with, and yeah.
The biggest struggle we have, Christian, is we don't want to give up our pride and self-sufficiency. And the only thing is, you have no self-sufficiency. You have none. You have no control over your destiny. You have some control to choose within the slavery of your sin how enslaved you will be, maybe. But that's not freedom.
So you said that before, if you walked away from Christ, that basically you have never been anxious.
Well, it depends. Some people walk away from Christ and then God, disciplines them and brings them back because they're really his children. Some people walk away from Christ because they were never his children to begin with. It's like the story of the prodigal pig.
Yeah.
You've heard the story of the prodigal son, right?
Yeah, of course.
Have you ever heard the story of the prodigal pig?
Pig?
Yes.
I mean the pearl things?
The prodigal pig.
Prodigal pig?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So
Yeah.
here's what
Tell a
happened.
story in
So
this.
here's what happened.
In the Bible?
The prodigal son found himself in a pig pen. The Bible says he came to his senses and said, I will go back to my father and I will tell my father, I have sinned against you and I've sinned against God. And perhaps my father will make me as one of his slaves, and at least I'll have food and clothes and a place to sleep. So he decided to go back to his father, but he had made friends with a pig. And the pig, we shall call him Wilbur. Wilbur decided, hey, that sounds like a pretty good life with your father. I think I'll go with you. So the prodigal son and the pig made their journey back to the father. Now we know the story of the father. The father ran to his son, he forgave him, he clothed him, he bathed him, he threw a party for him. He said, my son who was once dead is now alive. Now the pig, they did the same thing. They gave him a good bath, washed him up, put a necklace on him. But you know what?
What's next.
After about a few days, the pig was like, you know what? I really miss the mud. I want to be in the dirt. I want to be eating grubs. And he finally looked at the son and the father and said, hey, really, I thank you for your kindness and your hospitality, but I'm going to go back to my pig pen because that's really where I belong. So a lot of people who say they're the son really aren't the son. They're the pig. And sooner or later, they go back to the pig pen. And that is your bedtime story, children.
The first time I heard the pig one.
There you go. That's the story of the prodigal pig.
I thought you were alluding to him being on the plate of a breakfast or something.
That might be good too.
That might be good too, yeah.
Now, I cannot take credit for this story. I got this story by one very unknown preacher. You probably don't know his name. His name is J. Vernon McGee.
We all know J. Vernon McGee.
I know. I was being sarcastic. One of my favorite rhymes that J. Vernon had was, what was it? Once I was an amoeba, as small as can be. Then I was a monkey. Then I was a fish swimming in the sea. Then I was a monkey living in the tree. Now I'm a doctor with a PhD.
So I'm pretty slow, and I don't know McGee, but that's okay. But I think the story you're talking about, the prodigal pig, is talking about a believer or a supposed believer, maybe who thinks they're a believer,
Yes.
but maybe they're really not. It makes me think like
Yep.
the seed is thrown out on rocky soil or good soil, whatever, right?
Yes.
Is that kind of what that's all about?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, yep. Yeah, thanks.
Through the years, Tony, I've heard a lot of references to Vernon McGee. He had a radio show. Why do I hear so much about him? Is he just a really good teacher?
Oh, how firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, he has laid for your life in his excellent word. You know what? This guy's been dead for like 25 years. Oh, 4. Thank you. Appreciate that. This guy's been dead for like 25, 30 years. And he still has one of the largest ministries in the world. This is Psalms 1 that says his leaf will never fade. You know, it will always be green. He'll be planted by streams of water. J. Vernon McGee is still on the radio. It's Through the Bible Radio. Look it up on Google, Through the Bible Radio. And he is an old-timey, kind of got a Southern accent, good old boy. And man, is he an excellent teacher preacher. He just is. When I was a little kid, I remember going to the church in Castro Valley, the one that has the 3 crosses you can see from the freeway. And my dad took us, I was about 8 or 9, to hear Dr. J. Vernon McGee preach. And my dad listened to him on the radio every evening. I remember that before dinner, old J. Vernon McGee was on the radio.
Maybe he's got a podcast.
You could catch him on KFAX. I just put it in the chat.
You know what? He's on every Christian radio station. If you have a Christian radio station by you, look it up. And, you know, I think usually he's like 6:30 in the morning where I am here in Washington.
Reed, I'm sending it to you. I also put it in the chat.
All right.
And he's got a Southern accent. He talks kind of like this.
He goes, brother, these people say Jesus is my buddy. Jesus isn't your buddy. He's your Lord. I love it. He's so great.
But you know, the way he speaks is very soft. He's not like one of those fire and brimstone.
Well, you know what, Robert, go back to when he was a younger man. I've heard some of the recordings of when he was a younger man. He was much more animated. But you know, you get older, you get mellow, and you realize that all of your animation doesn't make up for the solid word of God. He was a great guy. Oh man, what a wonderful preacher, teacher. Through the Bible, he'd go through the Bible in 5 years.
Cindy has a question.
Oh,
go ahead, Cindy.
I have a question. We were back when we were talking in Romans about the reality that as children of God, as those who have been elected, who don't deserve it at all, who God's given mercy to, we should not be even thinking about complaining about it because blah, 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 blah. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with the election. But you were talking about how God, or how we need to not be really worried about anything. And anyway, so I started thinking that's really true. Our lives should really reflect such beauty and gratefulness. But I also start thinking about, like, let's say, for example, that I had a child who wasn't elected, and I, you know, of course, I would like for them to be elected, but let's say they aren't. That makes me not feel so happy, lucky about the fact that I'm elected.
Well,
what do you say to that?
Here's what I'd say. Number one, you don't know.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, you're assuming that election is some arbitrary or capricious decision that God makes. We do not know how God elects. What if in God's sovereignty, his election does have something to do with your persistence of preaching the gospel? So that's what I'm saying. Here's the danger of election, that you go, oh, well, you're either on the list or you're not on the list. Right? And you become fatalistic. Okay. The Bible never says how God chooses.
Okay.
In fact, the verses that say God desires that all men should be saved, along with Paul saying, I become all things to all men that I may save some, all of these hint towards the fact we don't know how election works. The point of election is not that God has this list that you're either on or off. The point of election is that it's God's mercy and love alone that saves you. That's the point. It's not about being fatalistic.
So that kind of answers Christian's question about, the puppet thing, and also when free will that God gives us kind of, not in the election per se, but, what we're doing as Christians.
Well, see, the thing is, you are a puppet until you get saved. The Bible says that. You are under the power of sin. You're a slave to unrighteousness. You are a slave to sin. You're spiritually dead. You are a puppet until you get saved. When you get saved, you're free. The strings are cut. You become a real boy. Now you see the world for what it is. You can make decisions not based on the slavery of sin, but based on the reality of righteousness and love.
I now I understand it too, because I heard God selected me. He called me like I was 8 years old, but I didn't know for a long time. And so he called me. He told me I chose you. You're special. It's the reason why you're alive. That was I remember, but I have no idea who said it to me. And even I went to the Christian university, so arranged marriage happened that day. However, I cannot grant 1 day or 2 days. It took me 4 years to marriage arranged husband. Is how wonderful it is. And then the look in the world or society would be completely changed to become being a selfish or I grew up very competitive. Everything competitive have to be first in the society or classroom. And if I am not first, I'm a failure or loser. That is I grew up. But I didn't feel that after I became a Christian. I feel so beloved. And even other people who get pride, I was happy for them. I didn't feel jealous. And he gave me another pride. So
I know that that's very common with the Asian culture, that there's a lot of pressure for success and to be first. And that's kind of sad. I think that just steals the joy out of people's lives. I was talking to one of my customers who he spent a lot of time in China, and his company just left China. They pulled all of their business out of China and went to Malaysia. And because they were housed in a facility of 100,000 people, and most of them were young kids that were being forced to work and were not allowed to leave. They had stores and whatnot there if they needed food, but they were not allowed to leave. And what began to happen is these kids began to jump off buildings. And then so they started having to put nets around all the tall buildings But unfortunately, the way they did it was they had to trim the branches to make room for the nets, but they trimmed the branches. The branches were just these sharp, pungy sticks. So you can imagine the mess that they had on their hand. And
Was
he
that
said, finally,
Foxconn?
what's that?
Was that Foxconn, the company?
You know what? I think it was Foxconn.
I've been in one of those facility. They do have
Yeah.
net there. Yeah.
Yeah, the gentleman I was working for, his name's Lynn. Yeah, it was Foxconn. That's exactly what the company was. It was Fox something. I'm sure it was Foxconn.
They
But he
make
said
all the
they-
iPhones.
Yeah, he said they
So-
ended up pulling out of China.
So
He
when
said it
you
was
buy
awful.
when you buy your product, look at the back, see what it says. If it's made in China, think twice about it.
Yeah, I don't think we should be doing any business with China with their slave labor and the horrible things that they're doing to people.
I don't understand what you mean about they trim the trees. What does
Well,
that mean?
Well, because they had to cut the branches so
Yeah.
that they could have room for the nets.
Yeah.
But when they trimmed the branches just became these sharp sticks that impaled people.
Oh,
So if you
I
jump,
see.
you end
I
up being
see.
impaled by the branches.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Oh.
just an awful, awful, and we're doing business with this country.
And then you heard about the Uyghurs, and these are the Muslims in northwest China in the Xinjiang province. Well, actually, it's not even part of China. China invaded, the East Turkestan and took over that part. And then now they put more than 1 million Muslims in the re-education camps and make them do hard labor work. Yeah.
Yeah. Slave.
And then
And we have 62 different American companies and corporations that are using slave labor.
Mhm.
And all of these corporations support Black Lives Matter. What a hypocrisy. What a joke.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. When you buy things, look at the
This is
label.
the fruits of unrighteousness, folks. This is being a puppet to unrighteousness. It's exactly what it is.
Hey, Tony, I got a question for you. I'm just curious how you're going to answer it. Can you be unsaved or unelected, but desire to be
No.
elected?
Nope.
Can you-
Because
you're dead.
the desire to be saved comes from God.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear you explain it.
Yeah. No.
You-
If you desire to, God is not going to go. What does Jesus say? Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And the point of that is you're not going to call upon God unless he's moved on your heart. Pure and simple. You don't go to God and go, gee, I want to be saved. And he goes, oh, sorry, not on the list. Too bad. Now you got to live your whole life knowing what's waiting for you.
But Tony, he says that everyone knows the truth because it's revealed in the nature of our world, but they chose to ignore it.
Right. And God handed them over to a darkened mind. So they know it and they innately know that God exists, but they're actively living their life to try to suppress the fact of what they know is true. And it makes for very miserable people. You know, why are transgenders killing themselves? It's not because people don't accept transgenders. It's because they are actively destroying the image of God in their own soul.
Yeah.
And so they're reaping the penalty, they're reaping the consequence for denying who their very essence is. And of course, they're going to be miserable.
So, Tony, you're saying that certain people, they know that it kind of in a general way that God is there.
Everyone knows. The
Oh.
Romans 1 says everyone innately knows that God exists, but they live their life as a puppet of unrighteousness, constantly trying to figure out a way to hide to themselves and to the world the truth that God exists.
You used the metaphor a long time ago about trying to hold a beach ball
A
under
ball
water.
underwater. You
Right. Yeah.
always have to be in contact with that ball.
And then some of these people are very angry. You know, I mean, I don't know.
They're angry because they hate God.
Yeah.
That's where they're angry. And what does Paul say in chapter 6? The what? The unbelieving mind is what? Hostile to God. That's where the anger comes from. All this anger that's going on in our country has not much to do about politics. It's really anger against God and against righteousness. That's where this anger is coming from.
Yeah. I can see that.
And sooner or later, it will be directed towards Christians.
Mhm.
Because the time is going to come when everyone else is going to acquiesce, and the only people left who will stand up and refuse to bow down to a culture of evil will be Christians, and then they're going to pay the price for it.
Well, a lot of our churches have already gone over that way. I mean, some of them are accepting homosexual pastors and, you know, doing that kind of thing to lead their children. And I'm thinking that our churches aren't, a lot of our churches have already gone over to being.
Well, you know, the Episcopalian, most of the Lutheran, most of the Methodist, most of the Presbyterian, these major denominations, and now the Pope is really flirting with homosexuality, and he's flirting with all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It'll just be a matter of time before he says abortion's okay, probably, and all this other stuff. So, you know, yeah, this is the great falling away, right? Now that the battle lines are being drawn, we're going to find out who believes and who doesn't. And we're going to find out that the Catholic Church doesn't, and that a lot of the mainstream Protestant churches don't believe either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tony, do you think the penetration of the rock and roll music into Protestant churches also is one of the causes for our decline?
You know, here's what I'm going to say about that. We have to be very careful in labeling. To say rock and roll is evil, you're going to say, okay, drums are evil, electric guitar is evil. None of these things are inherently evil. It's the motivation behind them. If you are playing an electric guitar or the drums because you want to worship and glorify Christ, then, you know, like David, who beat on drums and tambourines and cymbals, you know, it's fine. We have to be very careful when we start to, well, it's a certain type of music that's unholy. No, it's not the music. It's the motivation behind the music. When I listen to Petra, which is a Christian rock band, they are singing about the glory of Christ uncompromisingly, very different than if you're listening to Ozzy Osbourne. So we have to be, see, this is the kind of stuff where Christians shot themselves in the foot. Then when they began to generalize and say, this specific thing is evil, rather than looking at the heart. God does not look at the outside, he looks at the heart. What is the heart motivation? Now, it is true that a lot of churches who use more contemporary music use it because they're trying to placate the culture, and the motivation behind it's not right. That's true. But that doesn't mean that everyone who uses drums or electric guitar has an evil motive. That's where you become pharisaical and you begin to shoot yourself in the foot. So we have to be careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where do you draw the line on that? You know, is the piano evil? Well, the piano is a percussion instrument, you know, like the drums. You got to be careful. You got to look at the heart. What's being said? Why are people doing what they're doing?
Yeah. So I guess, you know, as I grow in my Christian walk, I become more interested in the hymns and then the substance of the words in the hymn. And then when I compare that with contemporary worship music, I find that it's kind of empty and it's very self-focused. It's all about I, me.
And I agree with you on
Right.
that. But there are a lot of contemporary hymn writers like the Gettys. Are you familiar with the Gettys music? In Christ alone.
Oh yeah. In
my
Christ alone.
hope
Yeah,
is
yeah.
found.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's fine.
there's contemporary music where they use drums and they use piano and they use whatever, right? But their music is Christ centered. So the issue is not the style of music. The issue is the content. A lot of the songs that Petra sings is based on scripture. So, you can't get more solid than that. So the issue is not the style of music. The issue is the content of the music and the motivation. I myself, I like hymns because the reason I like them is they're deeper in their theology.
Yeah.
But I also find that the Gettys, which are contemporary hymnists, they are very deep in their theology. So I enjoy that. I listen to the Petra because they're very deep in their theology and they're very contemporary Christian rock. So, to me, it's about the content of the music and not about the style of the music.
Would you say Hillsong is kind of light on the content?
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. I don't listen to Hillsong.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
Tony.
What I find is very self-focused.
Yes, it is. It's the prosperity kind of God. It's the kind of hymns that would come out of a prosperity gospel.
I have to say this has been a really interesting discussion, but I noticed Pat has his hat on. I think it came on right. I think it came on right after Tony yawned.
I'm thinking, Jeff's got to get his beauty sleep. Okay, just look at the guy.
Thank you. You're awesome.
That's a lot of sleep. I'm just
spot on.
Could we ask right before we leave, Tony, how's your goat that you just went to check on?
I went and checked on him. I don't think he's going to live through the night.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He can't. I tried to, earlier today he was able to stand up. He can't even stand now. He's shutting down. His kidneys are shutting down. His body's shutting down, and I knew that would happen, and it's just it's very sad, but it's part of life too. So we loved him and we took care of him, and he had a short life of only about 4 or 5 months. But it was a good life. He got a lot of love and a lot of attention. And it's, I always say I'm not going to cry, but I'll cry. Sad. Very sad.
He's going to go to the goat heaven.
Yeah, I wish there was a goat heaven, because if anyone should go to goat heaven, it would be old Gucci there. Sad. It's the curse. Our sin has its effect on these innocent little animals. So it's a reminder when we stare at their suffering, we stare into our own sin. So there you go. All right, Pat, why don't you pray us out? I don't think I'll get through it.
Okay. Dear God, thank you so much for a great evening tonight. And thank you so much for your word, for understanding, for just pounding this information that we've learned into us with great teaching and really, really fruitful, good discussion. I pray, Lord, that Tony's goat can make it. But I also pray for comfort on Tony and Roxanne and the rest of us who are going to miss the goat. And really, really enjoyed tonight. In your son's name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
Okay, guys, I'm going to take off because I got to go take care of this little guy.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony.
Another good night. Thanks.
Good night, Tony.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Tony.
Hey, so let me stop the recording.